Today I'm covering Justice League 75, also known as Death of the Justice League. We've known this is coming for quite some time. And yes, they killed the Justice League. I guess that's not really a spoiler considering it's right there on the cover. I'm going to talk about all this and I'm going to go over the spoilers of it in depth. But before that, I want to talk about where this comic book fails. And I want to say this first. This is a well-constructed, very well-illustrated comic book. There's nothing wrong with it. I mean, I would recommend it. I wouldn't give it a highly recommend or anything like that because there's just no juice to it. There's no real impact. When you go out there and you kill a major character like a Superman or a Batman or an entire team of characters like the Justice League, you hope there's an emotional impact or emotional investment on the part of the readers. At least that's what I imagine they're going for, but that's completely non-existent in this comic book. I don't think for 1 second that the Justice League are really dead. And the fact that I know that Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman will continue on in their own adventures after they've been dead certainly doesn't help. And we've already been told that the Justice League are coming back because that's going to be the purpose of Dark Crisis, is that the new Justice League are going to have to go out there and save the real Justice League. So it doesn't feel like anything important happened here. And I think that's a major misstep on the part of DC Comics. I remember in the lead up to this when Joshua Williamson was talking to the press, kind of hyping up the comic book and what it means and kind of leading into Dark Crisis, him mentioning he was inspired by the death of Superman and how impactful it was on him. But that felt like an earned moment. They really built up to that. They made Doomsday seem like the biggest threat in the history of the DC Comics universe at the time. And he was going to kill all of Superman's friends, and Superman had to fight him literally to the death until they both died to save not only, the Earth, but all of the people that he loved. That is a big time impact. Like you're talking, that hits you right here in the feel spots. This comic book, while well executed and very well illustrated, and yes, you do get the death of the Justice League, has none of that impact because they never really built up to it. Certainly not in the pages of Justice League. Brian Michael Bendis was on the book before this, and it never hints that any of this is happening, that this big threat is out there. The only place that this is really led up to is Justice League Incarnate, and I guess Infinite Frontier before that. I dropped off of Infinite Frontier after 2 issues because I thought it seemed stupid. Even when I heard Justice League Incarnate was important to Dark Crisis and leading up to this, I didn't go back and read it because I just didn't care, because DC Comics has not sold this very well. So while this is cool, and there are a lot of deaths, and it looks great, I cannot deny that, there's no emotional investment in it. And I came away going, yeah, that's a good comic book, but it should have meant more, to me as a big DC reader. I'm far more invested in DC Comics characters in the DC universe than I am in Marvel. And I came away from this like I was reading a Squirrel Girl comic. Okay, Squirrel Girl killed Thanos. The Great Darkness killed the Justice League. Okay, they're just going to come right back. And even in the meantime, before they do come back, all the heroes are still going to be here. There is no impact. And I know this is how I felt. I imagine that some of you felt differently. I would definitely like to hear from you. If you read Justice League 75, the death of the Justice League, how did you feel? Did you come away and did you feel emotionally invested? Or were you like, oh my goodness, they died. That's really sad. Or did you come away going, yeah, they killed the Justice League. It looks good. Because that's kind of the way I felt. Now we're going to get into the spoilerific part of this, and I'm going to talk about all the events leading up to it, how they died, and some of the other issues with this, because this event, Dark Crisis, and this death of the Justice League doesn't really have its own identity. They're doing everything in their power to remind you of all the stuff it's homaging, rather than the stakes and everything that are there in the here and now. They had already done that with Dark Knight's death metal for the most part. So it felt really repetitive at some parts. So let's get into Justice League 75, the death of the Justice League. Joshua Williamson writing, Rafa Sandoval on art, Jordi Terragota's in here as well. And when it opens up, we see all of our heroes. We see Batman, Wonder Woman, John Stewart Green Lantern, Hawkgirl, Superman, Zatanna, Aquaman, Martian Manhunter, as well as Black Canary being transported away at some point. You can see a lot of characters in the background that you would have known. You can certainly see Naomi behind Martian Manhunter. Green Arrow is the only character that saw the person that he loved being transported away. He actually grabs her and he comes with him. So he ends up being a part of the team because he's sucked away as well. The other character that we see this happen to is Black Adam, but he gets a full page on his own. And what happens is they are brought to the Hall of Heroes, and it turns out Justice League Incarnate are having some problems. They thought there was a threat that they could deal with on their own. It turns out that was not the case. And essentially, the very beginning of this comic book is a recap of what happened in Infinite Frontier and a lot of it in Justice League Incarnate, telling you what happened to Barry Allen the Flash. He's kind of lost in this weird reality. Darkseid is now a slave to the Great Darkness, and we're about to see multiverses destroyed. And we see the Justice League and Justice League Incarnate kind of come together, and they're going to fight the Great Darkness together and save the multiverses. President Superman does admit they wanted to bring in more heroes from Earth Prime, but their powers are diminished, and they grab the ones that they could. So apparently, in their minds, these are the best heroes they got. Black Canary apparently was more important than Green Arrow. And we're told Naomi is the most powerful entity in all of the Justice League, even more powerful than Superman, but they took an old passeroonie on her. And they get transported to the front lines of the battle. And I see something that was very eerily reminiscent of a storyline Jonathan Hickman had already done in the Avengers. I think it was the Secret Avengers, actually, when you had the Illuminati and they were going out there destroying universes. This looks very, very similar to that. And we see our heroes like, oh my goodness, everything's being swallowed up by the Great Darkness. And those are dead multiverses. And they're on the front lines of a dead multiverse. And they see the real enemy, or at least the main enemy in this comic book. And it is Pariah, who is under the spell of the Great Darkness himself. And he is going to use his antimatter chamber to create a new Great Crisis. As I mentioned, they do remind you of a lot of the crises in the past, and I think this is a mistake. And it gives you a supervillain monologue, and they tell him, you can't do this. Where's Barry? And Superman even says, I remember you. Your world was the first one to fall to the anti-monitor. You were a scientist. And then Batman says, cursed to go from one catastrophic event to another. Certainly, we have seen Pariah in the past be a big-time villain, and I imagine they've showed him a lot here in Justice League Incarnate. I did not go back and read it, as I mentioned, but we really haven't seen this character in any other comics as of late that I can remember. But he's the big villain, and then we get the big reveal. He's not the only villain. We get all the villains in the DC Comics universe. We've got Darkseid, Doomsday, we've got the God of War. We got all these villains from the DC Comics universe. They're part of the Dark Army of Pariah, who is under the spell of the Great Darkness himself. This is admittedly a great splash page. If this was part of a story that I was invested in, I would have been full up, you know what I mean? I would have been very excited for this. It's just another page, even though the art is really good, and this is cool stuff to see because there was no build up to it. You're just like, okay, we're now we're fighting. They said that they were going to kill him, so I guess we're going to see him kill him. And we do get some pretty darn good art here. We get this nice splash page of all the heroes fighting villains, and they're going toe to toe. And at first, it doesn't sound like it's going so bad, but we all know what's going to happen because DC Comics told us. This is the death of the Justice League. They are not going to make it. One of the real failings of this comic book is there aren't very many character moments. You have a lot of heroes that people love, and they just don't highlight them in meaningful ways before they die or as they die or something like that, which you would expect in a death of comic book. You want the death to be meaningful. You want it to be impactful. You want it to draw out the emotions of the reader, and that's just never really done here. We do get two character moments, and they just kind of fall flat. The first one I'll talk about is John Stewart, who shows up, and we've been reading about John Stewart and Green Lantern, if you stuck around for that, becoming the Godstorm. And he says, I'm bringing the Godstorm. And you can see we got Adam, we got Hal Jordan, we got Cyborg, we got all these characters. We got Flash in there. He's using all their powers. They're coming with him, and he gets defeated on the very next page. Well, it's a good thing you put 12 months into making this thing be a big deal, so you could just annihilate him in literally one page. It was ridiculous. This was supposed to be a moment, but it falls flat because of all the work that put in and was summarily destroyed, essentially in one page. The other character that kind of gets a moment is Oliver Queen, Green Arrow. As the fight's going down, Pariah is about to set off his device, and Green Arrow shoots one of his trick arrows, and this is going to save everybody, or at least they think. And you see it traveling through on the way to its target, and it's kind of a cool moment. And it does land, and it blows up, and it does nothing. Pariah just fixes the machine almost immediately. Doomsday comes out of the ground and kills him. That's as close as you get to a real character moment in this comic book, and that's one of the reasons I think the story really falls flat, besides the fact that we know that it doesn't matter, because they've already told us, you don't even need to read this. If you don't want to read it, go read the superheroes in their regular titles, because in the end, this isn't all that important. Another reminder of what Williamson and DC are doing here to really remind you of old things that you enjoyed in the past is they're kind of recreating the death of Barry Allen from Crisis on Infinite Earths. And we can see the flesh being ripped from the face as they die Barry Allen style from the Trinity themselves. It's a cool homage, but what's the identity of this event? Why do you keep reminding me of all the other events? I already saw this literally in Dark Knight's death metal, which was less than 2 years ago. And the cynical part of me believes that they're trying to distract you from the fact that there's not really anything here. They didn't really build this. They never earned any of these deaths. They just kind of kill them all off. And this is how the Justice League die. Obviously, Oliver Queen and John Stewart are already dead because they died earlier, but this is how they kill off the Justice League. They not only kill off the Justice League, but they do kill off Justice League Incarnate as well. Unfortunately, nobody cares about those characters other than Captain Carrot. And we do know that there's going to be one survivor. I told you earlier that Black Adam was the only person that got transported that got his own page. He was flying above Kandak. He ends up landing or being transported back to the Hall of Justice. He lands there. There's a big explosion. We see John Kent. We see Wally West. We see Naomi. And he tells them the Justice League are dead, and that's how he knows. And that is essentially the story. Those are the spoilers. That's how the Justice League die. It is well done. It's a good comic book. I recommend it. I'll give it like 3.5 out of 5. It's a good story with really good art. But DC Comics and Joshua Williamson forgot that you have to build up to these things for them to be impactful. This is supposed to be one of the most important comics in the history of Justice League. It's probably the most important comic of 2022 for them. And it kind of fell flat for me because I just wasn't emotionally invested in the story. I know that these deaths don't matter. I know that they're going to return at the end of Dark Crisis. DC and Marvel have absolutely ruined the concept of death in comic books. They have killed the idea that any death could ever be meaningful. You could kill off the entire DC universe, not publish a DC comic for 9 months, and I still wouldn't believe it, that any of the characters died. They're all going to come back. They need to find something new to create stakes. They need to find something new to do with the characters to really build to a moment like this to where people can actually buy into the idea of what's happening. Because at this point, I'm kind of checked out, and I just don't believe them. I know a lot of you are just like me. You're DC Comics diehard fans. You love the universe. You love the characters. And it's important to remember, it can always get worse. In this video, I run down the 7 deadly sins of DC Comics. The 7 things DC Comics did that were so egregious, they probably should have been shut down then and there, but they did continue on because it could always get worse, folks.